morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. As a YouTuber, the only thing that scares me more than the month of January is hearing the phrase, "you fell off," and luckily, that hasn't happened to me yet. I think. But in Generation 9, that phrase applies to a ton of Pokemon who have lost their usefulness over the years. So in this video, let's discuss some Pokemon that either fell off competitively speaking or lost a gimmick that made them special to begin with. And who better to start with than the thumbnail Pokemon itself, Terrakion. For any Patrick stars out there living under a bunch of rocks, perhaps one of the funniest things to ever happen to competitive Pokemon recently happened with the release of the Indigo Disc. Terrakion was an absolute wrecking ball for the first few gens it was available in. With excellent stats, a good setup move in Swords Dance, and great offensive typing, it could face off against nearly any opponent. And when Terrakion returned in Scarlet and Violet alongside many other legendaries, the expectation was that it would stay almost exactly the same. But unfortunately, Terrakion is dealing with a crisis that many of us may have to deal with soon. Getting your job replaced by AI. Literally. Iron Boulder is pretty much the exact same Pokemon, but with slightly better distributed stats, and an excellent signature move in Mighty Cleave, a rare rock-type move that actually doesn't miss. Because of Iron Boulder's overwhelming presence in the meta upon release, Terrakion was completely overshadowed and ended up dropping to the bottom tier. For those not well versed in competitive Pokemon, basically tiers are decided based on community usage rather than how good the Pokemon actually is, since there's literally 1,000 Pokemon to consider. And it turns out that basically nobody used Terrakion for the entire first month of the Indigo Disc meta. Does this make Terrakion a bad Pokemon? Heck no, it just can't be used in the same tier as its superior Paradox relative. But for the handful of hours that Terrakion was legalized in PU, its reign of terror couldn't be stopped, as it faced off against the greatest champions that the tier had to offer, Minun and Dewgong. Odds are Terrakion will continue to rise to the tier list as it completely bodies all the other low tier Pokemon in the game, but as long as Iron Boulder is around, this Pokemon may just forever be gated from entering the top tier. Okay, I know not everybody is here for all this competitive mumbo jumbo, so how about we take a quick break to discuss a Pokemon line that lost a relatively harmless gimmick. Of course, I'm talking about Deerling and Sawsbuck. Two relatively unremarkable Pokemon with one defining trait, their appearances changing with the season. Which of course is a mechanic that only exists in their debut generation, Gen 5. From Gen 6 to Gen 8, Game Freak had no idea what to do with Deerling after canning seasons. In those three generations, the only Deerling or Sawsbuck that can be found in the wild are the spring forms. At the very least in Gen 9, Game Freak did come up with a decent pseudo-solution. All four forms of Deerling and Sawsbuck are present in the wild, but each form is exclusive to a different province. You can even change the form of a Deerling or Sawsbuck that you've already caught by reloading the game while standing in the province of your choice, which is pretty cool. So since this is the first time that Deerling can change form since Gen 5, is this secretly the biggest Gen 5 remake hint of them all? I'm gonna say probably not. But while Paldea managed to make these Pokemon's original gimmicks somewhat work, I'm curious to see how this Pokemon will be handled in future generations. You know, despite being the golden child of Game Freak, few Pokemon have had a more inconsistent competitive history than Charizard. Seriously, if you graph it out, Charizard has more peaks and valleys than the Rocky Mountains. In Gen 1, Charizard isn't considered that great just for being a fire type in a meta filled with water types. In Gen 2, Charizard gains Belly Drum and becomes one of the best wall breakers in the game. This trend continued in the Gen 3 where it had one of the best move pools out there. But Gen 4 introduced one move that completely tanked Charizard's stonks: Stealth Rock. Yeah, I know, this move is kind of a meme for how common it is in competitive, but, well, it's kinda not a meme. This move actually killed a lot of great Pokemon. Sure, there are some Pokemon like Volcarona and Talonflame who are good despite its existence, but that's mostly because they have tools that Charizard could only dream of. Plus, this was also where many great bulky water types started getting introduced, which just hard-wall Charizard. And Gen 5 would pretty much be the exact same. But Gen 6 would revitalize Charizard with two amazing Mega Evolutions, and then Game Freak said, okay, you've had your fun, we're taking those back now. And thus Charizard fell off faster than Leafy is here. Well, at least in singles, as G-Max Zard actually proved to be one of the best G-Max Pokemon in the VGC meta in Sword and Shield. But as for base Charizard, sadly nothing had helped it. Not even heavy-duty boots can help Charizard climb out of the bottom tier, as it has to sacrifice attack power from Life Orb that it desperately needs. On top of that, Charizard has the classic issue of being a special attacker that's stuck with way too many physical moves, which also hinders its viability. And on that subject, why don't we discuss some Pokemon that the physical special split from Gen 4 actually harmed? We've talked a lot about Pokemon who got better with it, but not so much the other way around. Well, one example would be Alakazam, whose special move pool is now considerably more limited. Back in the day, it was common to see Alakazam run any of the 3 elemental punches as a coverage option, But sadly, Fire Punch, Ice Punch, and Thunder Punch are now all physical moves, leaving Alakazam with much less desirable options. Now, this didn't fully kill Alakazam off or anything, it's still a more than serviceable Pokemon, but could you imagine if it still had access to good moves of these types? It would probably never leave the top tier. But for a much more serious example, look no further than Sceptile. Sceptile was a pretty great Pokemon in Generation 3, with its move pool fitting around its role as a fast special attacker. But when the physical special split happened in Gen 4, Sceptile lost two of its best moves, Thunder Punch and even its former signature move, Leaf Blade. Back when all grass moves used to be special, Leaf Blade fits Sceptile to a T. But now there's this terrible incompatibility between the move and the Pokemon it was intended for. And now it seems like all Sceptile gets is physical moves despite being a special attacker. It actually makes me think between Leaf Blade, its current move pool, and general design, Sceptile was probably intended to be a physical attacker. But they made it a special attacker just to fit Gen 3 Leaf Blade. It might be the most unfortunate case of a signature move ruining the Pokemon itself. Now, if you're a big Sceptile fan and that last segment bummed you out, then don't worry, because John Game Freak just told me that he's going to buff Sceptile, but only if you subscribe to the channel right now, so don't wait. Shifting gears to another gimmick Pokemon that lost its purpose, we have Chatot. Chatot is a gimmick Pokemon designed to take advantage of the Nintendo DS's most noteworthy feature, the really crunchy sounding built-in microphone. Similar to a real parrot using its signature move Chatter, you could record yourself saying something into the DS's mic and have Chatot say it back as a move. This is pretty much the only thing Chatot was known for in Gens 4 and 5, because aside from that, it's a pretty useless Pokemon. And starting in Gen 6, when Papa Nintendo said, hey, maybe we shouldn't be letting kids yell vulgar phrases into the microphone to get them cancelled 10 years later, the gimmick was promptly retired. And ironically, Chatot has actually become a much better Pokemon since then. Chatter, despite losing its gimmick, got a significant buff as it now always confuses the foe, and Chatot now has access to the extremely powerful move Boom Burst, which at least gives it some viability. But at the end of the day, it's still Chatot, and most people are only going to know it as that one Pokemon that used to be a gimmick, but now doesn't even have that going for it. Going back to another Pokemon that used to dominate the early days of competitive Pokemon, we've discussed staples like Tauros and Persian on this channel before, but not so much this last guy, Exeggutor. Sporting a criminally high special stat in Gen 1, like so many other great Psychic-type Pokemon, Exeggutor was widely regarded as the best sleep powder user of the generation. And this reputation only continued into the next few generations as its move pool grew larger and this Pokemon gained more utility. Even into Gen 4, when power creep was starting to kick in, Exeggutor still stood tall as a versatile Pokemon that could fill almost any role a team needed. But starting in Gen 5, when Exeggutor had to start contending with more Choice Scarf users that didn't care about its Chlorophyll ability, actual bug types that are good for the first time ever, and Explosion, one of its best moves being severely nerfed, it became a far less scary Pokemon to go against. Pretty much any Pokemon with decent speed and physical moves like X-Scissor Terrakion or Crunch Tyranitar could invalidate this Pokemon instantly. The only highlight of this Pokemon's Gen 5 resume was when Wolf Glick used its Harvest and Skill Swap capabilities to great effect in VGC 2012, ultimately finishing at second place in Worlds. Gen 6 only served to further bury Exeggutor, as Sleep was nerfed to no longer work against grass types, and Game Freak had ended the Weather Wars by nerfing all weather setting abilities. So while Exeggutor was a jack of all trades, the problem is, all of its trades lost their usefulness over time. And speaking of weather, let's discuss what happened to one of Gen 5's biggest competitive staples, Politoed. We talked about Ninetales in a past video simply getting outclassed by other Sunsetters and even its regional variant Alolan Ninetales, but Politoed was pretty much always a sheep in wolf's clothing. This Pokemon was never considered great until Drizzle single-handedly carried it to the top tier in Gen 5. And as soon as a better Drizzle user in Pelipper came along in Gen 7, Politoed instantly fell to the pits of obscurity again. In fact, these Pokemon pretty much traded spots on the tier list. Pelipper was widely seen as a garbage Pokemon ever since its introduction, but with Drizzle, not only can it effectively use Hydro Pump like Politoed to do big damage, but it also has access to 100% accurate Hurricane, Roost, U-Turn, Defog, and a whole lot of other moves that essentially make this Pokemon Politoed, but better. Politoed didn't just get replaced by a better alternative, it got outright exposed as a fraud. And if you don't want to end up like Politoed, you'll like this video and subscribe for more videos to increase your Pokemon knowledge. I'll see you guys next time.